talk a bit about genetics. And genetics is becoming very, very important in clinical practice because of easy availability of genetic tests which are there. And the problem which often happens is now we've got so much availability that it will cause confusion in that regard. So what I'm going to do today is to talk a bit about basics of genetics, but more about how do we apply in terms of clinical practice, which tools are available, how do we use those tools, and we will use some illustrative cases to see how genetic tests will change a difference as far as your management is concerned. Now, genetics is becoming much more relevant from a clinical perspective because for a long time, the tests were not easily available. So all we had was access to maybe some karyotype, which we could do. We can send samples to some other country where they used to do it. But now with the next generation sequencing, it has really changed the way. It has democratized, so to speak, genetics. But that causes confusion because now we got so much information. How to filter that information and how to get it appropriate will be the major task of what we'll discuss today. And as in any other branch of medicine or any other branch of evaluation, be it a pathological test, be it a clinical examination, the key aspect of pre-test probability and post-test probability becomes very important. So when you think that this child may have a HESX1 deficiency because he has presented to you with an early onset multiple pituitary hormone deficiency, with a visual problem, with a midline defect, the chance that a HESX1 report which has come back as positive will be much more significant than maybe a random case of isolated GHT. So you have to have your comprehensive clinical evaluation done before you order a genetic test, and that's very important from that perspective. So we all know that the central dogma is that you have got the DNA, which is the genotype, which basically has got a section of those base pairs which act like a gene, which produce RNA. From RNA, you have proteins, and that proteins cause the typical phenotype to develop. So this is the typical dogma, and we all know about this from very early in terms of training. What we now know is that this is not very simple. There are multiple other factors which affected different steps in that regard. So what are these factors, Sayan?
So one is the epigenetics part.
Okay, then
there are various cofactors, transcription factors.
Okay, so you can have a problem which may have with regards to regulation of the gene. So your gene is there. So every cell has got the same genetic material, but the different genes are expressed at different time, place, and amount. So let's say the 17 beta hydroxylase lyase gene is not expressed before puberty. So you don't have any DHEAs produced. Once he starts getting expressed, it will be more after puberty and other enzymes will go up. So this regulation is very, very important. And this is happening via promoters, enhancers, and we'll talk a bit about that. Then you said epigenetics, which is anything other than genetics. So epi means extra and genetics means genetics. So anything beyond the differentiation in the genetic code, which results in this alteration, is known as epigenetics. And we think of environment as a major factor. Then, of course, one gene may influence the effect of the other gene. So these are genetic modifiers. Suppose you have got a glucocorticoid deficiency because of a particular gene, but your glucocorticoid receptor is hyperactive. So that will compensate for that. So the expression or the expressivity of a disease may vary between individuals. The penetration of the disease may vary between individuals. So these will be important. Then there are very important forms of RNA which themselves block a gene. So now we'll not discuss today in that much detail. We already discussed in our own sessions, is that DNA not only produces the messenger RNA, it produces a number of non-coding RNAs. And what do? They go and silence somebody else. So isn't it a wonderful way? The DNA is producing two things. One which is coding and producing a protein. The second which is silencing the other protein. So simultaneously one button is causing two different pathways to work together. And this is how these miRNAs, the siRNAs, the microRNA become relevant from that. Then of course, all the proteins are modified subsequently. So that will also make a difference. And therefore, all these factors together will influence. So you have this genotype, you will have this phenotype is no longer true. Same person, monozygotic individual twins, will have different manifestations because of any of these issues which may happen, and many of them will not affect their genetic code. So if you assess their whole genome sequencing, you may find nothing. So that is the whole thing, to understand that there are so many other factors which play an important role in the genetic expression. So the fundamentals basically are that DNA is basically there. It's a huge 3 billion base pair per cell. It is 2 meters per cell. It is compacted within what is known as a nucleosome. So nucleosome consists of histone proteins, and around that DNA is wrapped. The more compact it is wrapped, the less likely it is going to be read. So one mechanism by which the body says, okay, I don't want this DNA to be read, is to keep it in the safe deposit, in the locker. So this is what nucleosomes do. And this is a way of epigenetic modification. So this is histone packaging. And from there, they form the chromatid. And this chromatid then forms the chromosome. So this is how the whole hierarchy goes in. So there are all these things. You can imagine that you are in a locker room in which there are hundreds and thousands of lockers which are locked. As and when somebody comes to you with a key, and the person from the bank also comes with the key, so you have this double lock which opens, and then you can take out the money or something like that. So all these genes are actually in a locker. Everybody has got the same locker, every cell has got the same locker. But to have that, you need to have certain elements which have to come and act on the promoter gene. So you have got both the banker and the person, both keys start, and then you have got the expression which starts happening from that regard. So this is the chromosome, of course, we know about that. So how does the gene expression happen? Because this is an important thing. Having a gene does not mean the end of the thing. The gene expression basically involves two types of genes. So as I said, genes are base pairs which are responsible for a particular peptide or a particular function. Each gene has got exons which are basically expressed, and along with that you have got introns which are not expressed. Now what you need to understand, that out of the entire DNA that we have got, only 1.5% is expressed. So exome is only 1.5%. But 85% of the diseases we know are because of the exome. So if you talk about what we know now, exome is the one which is most important. But what do you think? Why are we not getting many diseases from introns, or one which are not coded, basically regions? So do you think they are responsible for something, or they are not responsible for disease? So a lot of these diseases will be subtle. So they will be like promoters, enhancers, regulators. So they will be subtle, it will be difficult to express and identify them. But the fact is, we don't know the genetic basis of so many diseases, and maybe we already know that there are 19,000 genes. We know a lot about them. We don't know about this 98.5%, which is non-genomic, non-exomic material, which is basically DNA only. But what it does, that is important. So in a very simplistic manner, what you need to remember is that in the gene, there is an initiation codon at which you have got the promoter which is acting, and this promoter is also enhanced by enhancers. So what's the difference between promoter and enhancer? Why I'm talking like this? Because if you read any textbooks, they will say this gene has so many promoters, so many enhancers. Promoter has to be very close to that particular gene. Enhancer can be either this side or that side. It can be very far off also. But promoter is very close, and you need to have the promoter working to have the gene expression. No promoter, no gene expression. But no enhancer, you will still have a gene which is working. So what does it, how do you think is, what's the difference basically in the setting?
The promoter has to be present. So
yeah. So promoter is the one which is who is doing it. So he is the person who is going to bat for your country. He is going on the cricket field to bat. Some enhancers are those people who support him. Let's say they're training him, they're greasing his bat, they're giving him whatever his fit. So these are like assisters. They are important, but they are not essential. Like leptin is required for final puberty, but it will not trigger puberty. It's like an enhancer, it's like a gateway. Similarly, this promoter plus minus, if it is there, you will have gene expression, no expression. Enhancers are the ones which are basically going to decrease or increase, but they can't start. They are not on-off button. They are like fan modules in which you can increase the speed of the fan, but they won't switch on or switch off the fan. Simple as that. I think that will be the promoter and enhancer difference. So from there, all your gene is coded. This is known as the pre-RNA. And from pre-RNA, you have got the exons, which are basically then spliced out. What is splicing? Cutting, like splice, you just cut thing off and then suture them off. So this is splicing, which happens, and there are splice boundaries from which splicing won't happen, and then you form a new content. So you have cut the cloth and sewed it together. This is how the new thing has happened. So this is basically the exome and intron, which is there. 1.5% of the entire DNA is causing 85% of disease. So the first question which comes to you is, if you have somebody in which you are thinking of a genetic disease, will you like to do a whole exome sequencing or a whole genome sequencing?
Whole genome.
Why?
Sorry, whole exome. I meant whole.
Whole exome. Because see, you can theoretically do a much bigger thing, but 85% chances are that you can get it on whole exome. Even before that, if you know that this is looking like a XYDHT, these are 20 genes, I think they are more likely. So maybe you go for the targeted panel. Targeted panel, then whole exome, then whole genome. Why would you like to go for a targeted panel, then a whole genome or a whole exome, Narayan?
The targeted panel, so we will be able to minimal only the genes which are responsible for the disease.
Yeah.
So we will be able to make the diagnosis.
So if you are supposed to say, okay, I have given you this 2 volumes of this book, you have to read. So if you read a particular chapter, like you want to read endocrine genetics, or you read the whole this thing, which one will you give more depth? If you read particular areas or the whole book?
Only the genetics.
So if you get that, okay, you have to read these 4 chapters, your knowledge will be much more. If I say you read the whole book, your knowledge will be less as compared to that. So as simple as that. So if you give the whole genome sequencing, there will be a lot of efforts which are required. But for every, and we'll discuss how the whole genome sequencing works, is the coverage of that area will not be very good. So like if you're reading the whole book, your coverage will be less. If I say these 4 places are more important, you will go many times on that and read it. So simple. So if you know that 99%, this fellow has got congenital adrenal hyperplasia, which looks like a male CAH. So it could be star, SCC. These are 5 to 10 genes which are there. Why don't you look at just 5, 10? So you can see many times rather than seeing the whole thing. So now if I just go simply in terms of genetic diagnosis, if I know that this patient clearly has a HESX1 mutation, I just say, okay, you go ahead and do a Sanger sequencing of that particular gene. End of the story. If I know this is an anterior pituitary problem, which may be because of these 20 genes, you can go for those targeted 20 genes. If you say, okay, it looks like a hypothalamic problem or pituitary problem, but I don't know which gene is involved, there is no panel, you go for the whole exome sequence. And when you say, okay, I've done the whole exome, nothing has come out, you then go ahead with the whole genome sequencing. What is clinical exome, Pratik?
Based on the clinical features, they will look into panels, such as the DSD panel.
Clinical exome is basically what some of the labs do that. When they say clinical exome, what they mean is that those clinically relevant genes which have been discovered till now. So you know there are 20,000, 19 to 20,000 genes are there, but not all of them have been associated with diseases. So there will no known problems are there in these genes. So maybe 6,000, 8,000 or whatever, they will do that. So that is between targeted, then you have got clinical exome, whole genome. So this is how you can do. So of course, if you see the whole world from a very far distance, your power will be less. If you are supposed to say, okay, only this booth you have to look at, you will be more focused in that. So this is simple as that. So this basically will depend upon the time, place, and amount. So this is how the variation in expression happens. Now, once you transcribe, which basically means this DNA is converted into RNA, and RNA is bound via the capping and the poly A tail, which then goes through the nucleus, and it goes to the ribosome to start producing the further process of translation. So we all know about this transcription and translation, and then you have the protein which is formed. Now, translation requires basically the translation RNA or the tRNA, which basically code for one amino acid for these three basically base pairs. And one by one, you know the code, there are 64 combinations which are available and 20 amino acids. So there is redundancy which is there. Based on that, you will have different proteins which will keep on forming based upon the code you have, and the protein sequence will come. Now, this is a simple peptide. 1, 2, 3, 4, all in a line. But if you see any protein structure, it is often complicated. Often you have got this curve. Some of them have got double bonds. You talk two chains which bind together. Which is two chain bind together? And insulin, A and B chain. Which one has got a large chain which coils and forms the bond between each other? Growth hormone production. So everybody has got a different structure, and structure is also very important in terms of function. So it's not just the linear amino acids, and that's why I said same sequence, if your structure is different, you will have a different outcome which will happen. So this is how the various amino acids are formed, and then after that they are modified. Some proteins are cleaved into smaller proteins. Like, which protein is cleaved? Preproinsulin, preproAVP, POMC. So all of them are cleaved into insulin, into AVP, into ACTH. So this cleaving makes them active. So this makes them an active molecule. Otherwise, there are so many hydroxylation, particularly for collagen, methylation, acetylation, which change basically the pattern the protein is. So anything which happens from gene promotion to gene enhancement to gene expression to the gene sequence to the transcription, which involves microRNA, translation, post-translational can alter the phenotype. So it's not just your gene change which is going to alter the phenotype, anything can change. So you have to be much more open your minds beyond that. And that's why your introns will come into the picture, which becomes important there. So now it is easy to understand that from your genotype to phenotype, it is not a black and white story. If you have this mutation in this position in 21 hydroxylase, you will always have a salt wasting crisis. No, it is not relevant. There's so many other things which may happen. And same gene, same variant will have, maybe A person will have different manifestation, B may have different manifestation, and C may have no disease. People, and I'll talk about that, if you do your own whole genome sequencing, 20 to 30 disease-causing mutations will be found. We never know. If you go in the general population, people will have mutations for men, for Modi. It doesn't mean that they will develop Manin Modi. And that is why there are a lot of modifiers which play an important role. And there are two major modifiers basically. One is, of course, the genetic modifier. So one gene can affect the other. And second is the environmental modifier. So if the environment modifies, you will have a change. So that's why this will lead to difference in the level of manifestation. It may or may not manifest. This will be known as which problem? A disease which has come from a family is coming in some and not coming in some. This will be known as problem of penetrance. And then mild to severe is expression. So expressivity and penetrance. This is very, very important. So you cannot extrapolate findings which are there from a family with a disease to the general population. Again, an important principle from genetic perspective. So epigenetics, as I said, is basically the way in which you lock your DNA either through methylation of cytosine or the binding of the chromatin. They will sleep. So now once you open it up, they'll suddenly start acting. And there are ways in which this is done. We won't go now into much detail, but there are ways, specific molecules which write, read, and erase these code to allow the expression of particular molecules which happens. And in certain cases, it will be stopped from that perspective. One very important concept in genetics is imprinting. So, Naveen, what is imprinting?
The particular gene is being inherited from a parent. In case the genes are deleted or not imprinted, so it will be inherited only from a single person. So in case if there is involvement in the form of methylation or deletion or duplication,
Mhm.
and there will be manifestation.
So, as you rightly said, imprinting is a simple way in which the genetic expression depends upon where the defect comes from, father or the mother. And the reason imprinting developed was an evolutionary phenomenon. Father's genes want the fetus to grow more, and mother's gene want the fetus to not grow too much because their own nutrition will go. So there is a way to compensate. Paternal genes are causing overgrowth, maternal genes are causing undergrowth. So that's why body has to make a balance. In some places, they will switch off the father's gene. Some places, they will switch off the mother's gene. Now, if there is a problem in that, you will then have a epigenetic manifestation. So essentially, there will be some areas in which father's genes are silenced by methylation, by histolation, or whatever. We discussed about the mechanism. And this is known as paternal, or father is silenced imprinting. If mother's is silent, it will be maternal imprinting. Now, if you have a defect in father and father's gene is already silenced, it won't make a difference. But if you have a defect now coming from the mother, that gene is not silenced, you will have an expression. The classical example is pseudohypoparathyroidism, which is going to cause only problems of hypocalcemia, hyperphosphatemia if it is coming from the mother. This we have discussed in impaired PTH effect. Now, what are the other imprinting disorders, Pratik?
Prader-Willi and Angelman,
Mm-hmm.
Beckwith-Wiedemann and
Mm-hmm. So Beckwith-Wiedemann, Russell Silver, Prader-Willi, Angelman, and pseudohypoparathyroidism, and more from endocrine perspective.
neonatal diabetes.
Yes, transient neonatal diabetes and SDH-associated paraganglioma. So imprinting is a very, very important mechanism we need to understand in a pediatric endocrine perspective. Lot of diseases are there. So now we have talked a lot about the basic mechanisms. We'll now go forward how we differ from each other. So how many base pairs are different between two humans?
So 0.1%.
0.1%. So 0.1% looks nothing. So you say 0.1%, we are 99.9% similar. But you remember, one gene defect can cause such a severe manifestation. So 0.1% is huge. So if you compare basically an individual to the population, and I'm not saying normal population because we don't know what is normal, because every population has got different allele frequencies. So if you compare an individual to a reference population, so to speak, which are available on the internet databases, you will find that they have 0.1% variation. But 0.1% means what? 3 billion base pair. That means 3 million variation. So 3 million is huge. So everybody has a difference of 3 million base pairs will be different. But now you will say this base pair is in the exon or intron. If it is an intron, I'm not bothered about that. Okay. Then you will say, okay, it is in the exon region, but is it changing the amino acid or not? You know that there are 64 possible combinations of codons and 20 amino acids. So a lot of them are redundant. So then now next, if you look at it, is non-synonymous mutations, which means that the protein product will be different by that particular gene. They are there 300 to 600. We have got 300 to 600 different proteins. So maybe you are producing different protein, I am producing different protein from the same gene. And that is why we have variations. Otherwise, why will there be any variation? Then you say, okay, maybe this protein is hydrophobic. Even now it is hydrophobic, so structure will not change. But novel variations, new variations, which are not reported are 150. Very importantly, 25 to 30 mutations which are known to cause diseases will be present in every individual, which makes it very difficult. Some countries are now even thinking that at birth, we will take the whole genome sequencing of everybody. And then based upon that, we'll say, okay, you have a risk of breast cancer, you've got a risk of this, you've got the risk of that, risk of cardiac disease. Fair enough. But what about these 25 to 30? If everybody has got 25 to 30, they don't have 25 diseases. What it means is that the penetrance of many of these diseases is Very unclear in a population terms because the pre-test probability is very low. In a family who has got medullary carcinoma thyroid, what is the pre-test probability of a child being affected? Naveen, it's autosomal dominant disease,
So 50%.
50%. In a population, Pratik, 1 in a million. So pre-test probability is 1 in a million in a population and 1 in 2 in somebody who actually has a family history. Now, if you are positive with a family history, your post-test probability is nearly 100. But from 1 in million, how much it will become? So you can't use the same criteria that, okay, if I do everybody in India, 130 crore people, we do their genetic profile and we will find so many with these mutations, they don't need surgery. So this causes a big problem. The problem is exaggerated from your perspective when you get an NGS report. When you get an NGS report and you say, okay, I had done it for somebody who had neonatal diabetes, but this shows that he has a risk of medullary carcinoma thyroid. Now, what do? It's like a shock. So therefore, it is a big problem as to what do you do in the form of incidental findings, or this becomes like a genetic incidentaloma. So what would you do, Pratik, in this case?
If it's just a finding without any no pretest, I would not look into it. But if there's family history, if there's even one of the features and increases the
Yes. So this is a evolving problem which people have to look into answer. So many cases they say, okay, we will not tell you the result. There is a variant of unknown significance, it won't be told to you, which is fair enough. But then there may be some diseases which are very, very likely to do. So therefore, American Medical Genetics Group has come up with 53 conditions which you have to report. If you find these 53, you have to tell the patient and the doctor, unless they have said that I don't want to know. They might say also, I don't want to know. But in India, I think they talk about, they follow that. You have to, if these 53 come, like breast cancer, Huntington's chorea, like conditions which can have acute problem and you can prevent them, you have to tell the person who is there. But this is a big problem. 25 to 30 disease causing mutation in us without a disease, which is very interesting. How common is the Mendelian disease prevalence sign? In the population, how many of them will actually have a disease? We talked about variation, but how much is it? How common is the disease? Your guess? 1 in how many children will have a Mendelian disease? 10 lakh. So it's reasonably common. It's 0.4%. So 0.4% will have some sort of a variation of which could be considered as pathological. So it's not that uncommon as well. So 250 may, one of them may have one of the, there's so many diseases. And if you actually look at adult manifestations, it may go up. That's why we say MODY may be 5% of type 2 diabetes. So 5% of type 2 diabetes is huge. If you have so many millions of type 2 diabetes, 5% is also huge. So that's why there is a genetic component. But then in complex traits, you will more likely to have a problem in the other genes. So now the problem is that population of India may be entirely different from population of Western Europe. 75% of the database comes from Western Europe. 15% comes from South Asia. Then some comes from Africa. Then some comes from different parts. So how can you say that that's a normal reference? Suppose this gene variant is there in Europe, which is protecting them from or from vitamin D deficiency, may be different in Africa where there is so much sunlight, in India where there is so much sunlight, there the variation are there. So again, the issue happened that there may be a allele variation in the frequency in the population. So ideally, you need to have population-based databases which are there. Then suppose you have a small this thing and you have a founder effect. What do you mean by founder effect? You read it a lot in these genetic diseases. Pratik?
the first person to have the
So if you have small groups, like people are in tribes and they are going somewhere, one person, he had that disease. So now everybody will in that group will have much more likely to have those diseases. So this is known as founder effect. And genetic drift, with time, these genotype changes. So these all things become important. So now when we say genetic variation, remember I'm not saying mutation. The word mutation is not used now because mutation had been defined as an inherited irreversible change in the genotype which is causing a disease. Now, they may not cause disease in me, it may cause disease in somebody else. So how can you call it a mutation? So that's why we call about variation. So it's varying. So variations can be single nucleotide, which are 50% of all. It can be basically in single nucleotide missense, which means that they are changing the codon, and that could be synonymous. What is synonymous, Pratik?
The similar. Yeah. Even if the change of codon is in protein.
So the amino acid is not changing. So your codon is changing, but your amino acid is not changing. Then non-synonymous, your amino acid is also changing. Then you can have nonsense. Yeah, that means you're stopping the production of that protein. Or you can have a splice defect. So sometimes you have ABCD, you have ACD, DAD, something like that. So these variations can happen. You can have insertion deletion. So something has come in, something has gone out. This can be 25%, frame shift, and within frame. What is frame shift, Naveen?
The entire frame changes.
Yeah, so you will have
More of
not multiple of threes. So 1, 2, 4, 5. If you have that, your whole frame will shift. Or it can be in frame. This could be the other possibility, in that your change is 3. So one amino acid is changed, remaining are the same. Then you can have copy number variation, which means that some part is deleted, some is duplicated. So this is known as delta, deletion, duplication. And of course, you can have epigenetic. Now, Cyan, which of these, if you see in the report of NGS, will you say that this is definitely pathological or most likely pathological? So nonsense, usually you will say likely at least pathological, you will say. Splice site may also be quite significant, because if you know that the whole amino acid sequence goes off, it will be important. Then third, frame shift. So if frame shift is gone, the whole protein is gone. But if you have synonymous, you will say less likely to cause disease. Non-synonymous, plus minus depend, then you have to go by how your gene is changing, how your proteins are changing, and you will know the variations from there. So now how does this variant affect the phenotype? Becomes important. So this will change the protein. Now this protein change may be change in amino acid. Now I say lysine is changed via proline, but both are similar amino acids. Now whether this is going to make a change or not, how will you know about that? Naveen?
whether it is causing any manifestation phenotype.
No, but how do you know the phenotype? Like you are in a genetics lab, you know that this mutation is causing substitution via a polar amino acid to another polar amino acid. So will it change or not? So there are prediction models which computers generate that this structure is changed by this, this may happen. But these are all predictions. Like election, we get so many results predictions, they are all always wrong. So you can't just rely on these prediction models, but there are ways you can do that. This is known as in silico prediction. So you have in vivo, which is in a live area, in vitro, which is in the test tube or in the lab, and in silico. Silico means silicon. So it's like a computer-based prediction. So amino acid change, amino acid type, polar, non-polar, hydrophobic, non-hydrophobic, site, which position. So suppose one amino acid is there which is binding to the ligand. You have got growth hormone receptor, and that amino acid is very important for binding of growth hormone. That's why when you read in all these books, they say this is this region, membrane binding region, this region. You will say, why are they talking about all this? This is relevant because that will decide about the change that particular mutation will cause. So if it is affecting a particular part of that which is most important functionally, it will have an effect. But if everything is fine, it's part of that structure which is intracellular doing nothing, it may not cause a difference. So this is how you will try to predict. And based on that, you can then divide into 5 areas of severity. And this is what you get in the report: pathogenic, likely pathogenic, unknown significance, likely benign, and benign. We'll give examples and see how they are different and what they mean in clinical practice. So prediction, how do you do is whether it is changing the function based upon the models which are there computer. You also look at whether it is conserved or not. If it is conserved across so many species, if a particular gene was still conserved in a frog and that gene is deleted, this is going to cause a huge problem. If that particular gene was not even conserved till, let's say, Neanderthal, then definitely there is a problem. It won't cause a problem. It's a new thing. So the longer the evolutionary history is there, the more important it is in that perspective, in which you have to consider in that regards. And of course, if it is associated with previous disease, family members and other things will also give you that. So now we have talked about variations, how the variations happen. Now, how the variations go from one person to the other, one generation to the other. So inheritance can be monogenic, oligogenic. Oligogenic means you need more than one genes to cause a disease. Polygenic, where there are so many genes, but there are all like too many cooks are spoiling the broth. One is not responsible, but tens of genes are there. This is like many common diseases you see. And finally, complex traits like diabetes, lipid, in which you have got environment and gene comes in the picture. Most of us deal with monogenic conditions when we talk about endocrine genetics. And monogenic can be Mendelian, so that they follow the Mendel's law, which are, Pratik, 3 laws of Mendel. Cyan. So basically the 3 laws. So you have law of segregation, law of aggregation, segregation, and then finally dominance. So basically you have got 2 alleles for the same. One particular allele decides one particular phenotype and they go separately, and then you can have dominant, recessive, codominant. This is what Mendelian inheritance is. So when you talk about Mendelian, it means it's a rare disease. If you have the gene, you will have a disease. If you don't have a disease, you don't have a disease. This is simple Mendelian. And this can then be dominant, recessive, X-linked, Y-linked. We'll talk about that later on. And it can be non-Mendelian, which means that these laws are broken. You have a dominant disease, but it is not manifesting in each member of the family. Penetration issue. Somebody has a milder disease, somebody has a severe disease, which is an expressivity issue. Comes from the father, there is a problem. Comes from the mother, no problem. It is basically an imprinting problem. Some cells are affected, some are not affected. This is mosaicism. So many other things can cause non-Mendelian problems like mosaicism, imprinting, mitochondrial, and finally penetrance issues. So if you talk about diseases, the more common they become, the more likely that they are not a primary Mendelian disease. It will be rare with high penetrance is Mendelian, common with less penetrance are complex traits. So now Mendelian inheritance, as we said, is segregation. Genes go separately from father and mother. They then are assorted separately. So 2 different genes will go one way, the other. And then you will either have a dominant form, you will have a recessive form or a codominant form, which we all know from our genetics earlier in that situation. So now we'll start quickly about autosomal dominant. So basically autosomal dominant means that 50% of people will be diseased, and how many will be carriers, Dilip? No carrier. This is a classical Mendelian. So what you see here is that 50% will be affected and every generation is affected. Basically, there is no preference from father or mother. Whoever has it, they will give to the children. All generation affected, severe 50% chance of inheritance. But this case you discussed last time also, 3-year-old achondroplasia, family not affected, he was reassured. But now the next child comes to you again. You said, okay, nothing to worry. This is just a freak thing. This fellow has had mutation, but next child developed achondroplasia. So Dilip, what was the problem in this case? Because father or mother, no, none of is affected. But how does this child, again, the second child also has a disease? Rarely, but something more likely, Cyan. So there was a mosaicism. So mutation happened not in the somatic line, the mutation happened in the testis of the father. So father's sperms are carrying the mutation, but not his cells. So that's why you have got a germline mutation which can cause this. So this is important. What about this inheritance? What you are seeing here? You are seeing this looks like that there is an apparent novel mutation, but because father had a germline issue, this problem is coming into both the children, the same case we discussed. So mosaicism simply is that after the zygote formation, if you have got a genetic defect in one cell line, only that is affected. If it is at first division, it becomes 50%, otherwise 25 and 12.5. And the classic, the most common form of mosaicism is, Pratik? Most common overall. Cancers. So all these adenomas, cancer, when you say thyroid adenoma, what is there in thyroid adenomas? Which genetic defect is very common? TSH receptor mutation. So if you talk about adrenal, you will have ACTH and all those receptor mutations. So they are all mutations, but they're only in those cells. That's why you're not, this is mosaicism. All cancers are basically mosaicism. That's why these genetics become very important in cancer as well. You're very right that McCune-Albright is a classical example when you talk about an endocrine disease. Now, the other thing to remember is, so this is that case, 2-year-old girl with vaginal bleeding, breast development was there, cafe au lait spots were there, ovarian cyst, LHFSH low, this is peripheral precocious puberty. You did the GNAS1 study, it was negative in the blood. Can it still be McCune-Albright, Naveen?
Yes, sir.
So you do in blood, if it is positive, well enough, negative, 40% cases will be negative. Then you can do in the ovarian cyst, you can find that. So this is what we call about mosaicism. Now this result, 5-year-old girl with hypocalcemia, hyperphosphatemia, normal creatinine, low PTH. This is hypoparathyroidism. Growth failure, you did a NGS, it showed a RET1 mutation, no family history. What do you think about this sign?
This is not significant for the population.
Okay, so this may or may not, you don't know, because unless there is a population-based study, nobody can tell about that. But yes, you can't say that there is a 100% chance of this person developing a thyroid cancer. You don't say that, okay, remove his thyroid. His parathyroid is already gone. You don't want to remove his thyroid also unnecessarily in this setting. So this is what is penetrance and expressivity. So penetrance is how many of this particular disease, this particular gene will develop the disease, and expressivity is how severe would the disease be. So this is quickly, Dilip, penetrance is incomplete, expressivity is, so no, expressivity is not variable. If they are severely affected, they are affected. Second situation, penetrance is complete, everybody is affected, but some are mild, some are moderate, some are severe. And this is like some are mild, some are moderate, some are unaffected. So you can have variations in terms of penetrance, in terms of expressivity. This is clinically less relevant for many of these endocrine conditions. There you will have clear-cut this thing. But it is very relevant for many of these things, as we said about these men mutations. So when you talk about population results, you can't know what is happening. But in a family, you know they tend to behave similarly because the other genes are also similar. Because genetic modifier, environmental modifier are shared in the family. That's why you expect that they will behave similarly. But in population, you don't know what is happening. Maybe there is another gene. So what is RET? Sign. What does RET code for? Coding for? Yes. So tyrosine kinase, receptor tyrosine kinase. So it is an activating mutation of the tyrosine kinase. Tyrosine kinase will do what? It will phosphorylate. But suppose, I'm just talking about a supposition phase, that you have another gene which causes phosphorylase activity. So suppose somebody has got more phosphorylase, it is going to compensate this tyrosine kinase in a way. So, but in the family, that becomes less likely because a lot of 50% genes are anyway shared. So then the chance becomes less. But in general population, that's why you have reduced penetrance. It's not just because of any random reason that there is a reduced penetrance. Either in their environment, the oncogenic factors are less, or some other gene is trying to help them out. So this is what is happening. So non-Mendelian inheritance, you see the father is affected. None of this generation is affected. You see next generation again too affected. So this looks like a recessive, but it is actually a dominant. The issue is basically of penetrance, which becomes important. Now this is autosomal recessive. You know all very clearly that 25% will actually be diseased and 50% will be carriers. And this is a classical, and usually consanguinity is a common phenomena in that parents are unaffected. So if parents are affected, If both parents are affected, if you have a child, what will happen to him? Pratik? If there's an autosomal recessive disease, if you say this is a recessive disease, parents are also affected, what will happen to the child? Less affected, more affected?
More 75% affected.
No. In terms of expression,
More.
very, very more affected. So suppose you have got some father and mother in which calcium sensing receptor is acting at 50%. So they will present to you as hypercalcemia with hypocalciuria. Both genes meet together, they present you with neonatal severe hyperparathyroidism. So this is important. Apparent autosomal dominant disease, when you have a double dose, the child will be the most severely affected. GCK defect, mild. Both GCK defect, severe diabetes in the neonatal period. So this is obvious because now this is like a dominant disease in that setting, which becomes recessive. So double dose is there and mild disease may happen. So X-linked inheritance, key characteristics, Naveen.
So it will start, the only males are affected, in
Yeah.
X-linked disease. And mothers are base carriers, and
There is no father to son transmission.
no father.
So if you have father to son transmission, it is unlikely to be X-linked character. So basically what you will say is that 50% from the father. If you have father is affected, then all the daughters will be carriers. If mother is affected, you will have all males affected and you will have 50% of the girls as carriers, which will happen. So this is what happens. So 50% affected and carriers in that regards. No father to son transmission. Do you also get X-linked disorders in women?
So that can be in cases of where one X chromosome has been
Turner syndrome. Yeah. Then what else? If the skewing of the lionization is done in a very erratic manner, some cells may be more likely to be affected. What else?
Dominant.
If you have an X-linked dominant pattern in which both genes are required. So this happens with hypophosphatemic rickets, which you will see, and maternal uncles and grandfather, they will be affected in that regards. Y-linked inheritance, don't bother. It is not a clinically relevant thing. Why? No.
It's like eye color.
No. Why is Y-linked blindness, Y-linked not very important? Because the genes which are, Y is an orphan chromosome. It has hardly anything. And people say that Y chromosome is shrinking. So maybe we are all heading towards XO, towards that sort of phenomena. So basically Y has very limited genes. So usually Y-linked inheritance are very, very rare. And if you have Y-linked, what are the major genes in the Y chromosome? They are there for testicular development. If they are gone, they will be infertile. So there will be no inheritance. So it's not there, but for theoretical purposes, it will be father, son, father, son. So all males will be affected. Every generation will be affected. What about this pattern? You see that the father is affected. Two children are affected. What is happening? Why mutacism? So father has given to both son and daughter. Son is transferring, daughter is not transferring.
Imprinting.
So it's a form of an imprinting disorder. You can think of only from father, both are affected. And the classical example of this is this disease. Normal till 3 years of age, rapid progression of obesity, hyperphagia, small phallic size. You think it looks like a Prader-Willi syndrome. You send a fish, but that is normal because the problem can be at a methylation level, and that you have to do. So some basic genetic information becomes important because 5% may actually have a methylation problem and fish will be normal. We'll talk about what fish is. So imprinting, as I said, is if it is coming from the father, it is maternal imprinting. So mother is silence coming from the father. If it is paternal imprinting, not coming from the father, coming from the mother, father is silenced. So this is the basic concept there. 21-day-old boy with irritability, mild dehydration, calcium is 14, PTH is high. So PTH dependent hypercalcemia. Urinary calcium creatinine is on the lower side. So Cyan, what is this?
So calcium sensing receptor from both the parents.
from both the parents. So this is severe. Okay. Father has got, you did the reports in the father, he had got hypercalcemia with hypocalcemia. So he has calcium sensor. Mother is normal. Why? Because your logic would, both of them would be effective. His calcium is not that high. See, you can have this as a neonatal severe, but it is milder. So Pratik, what is happening?
This is a neonatal hyperparathyroidism. There's only one parent has high, and that too coming from the father.
Yes. So when it comes from the father, this person's calcium sensing is defective. So he will say mother's calcium is low. For him, that normal calcium will also be low. So he will have hyperparathyroidism in the fetal period, and that way he'll develop an immediate in the postnatal period, he'll develop hypercalcemia. But over time, he will become normal. Suppose it had come from the mother, what would have happened, Naveen? Would he still have a problem of hypercalcemia? Why? Because mother will also have hypercalcemia. So they will not develop that stimulus on that. So this is an important way how environment can change. And it's not an imprinted disorder, but still I will call it pseudo imprinting. In that if you have basically coming from the father, normal, but father is coming, it becomes neonatal hyperparathyroidism. Otherwise, it becomes a familial benign hypercalciuria. So this is what is there. What about this inheritance? What do you think? So this person is severe, this is mild disease. So this is basically dependent upon different other factors. So it can be an expressivity issue. 7-year-old boy, now this is a different thing altogether. He presented to us with growth failure, doll facies, peak growth hormone was low, he had hepatomegaly, SGPT was high. So what are we thinking here, Dilip? A child comes to you who is short and plump, looks like growth hormone deficiency, but has a huge liver. Naveen? So we are thinking of GSD. So now what happened here is that he had hypoglycemia, which was ketotic, but you know it is GSD type 3 or 6. Then you send it for a Sanger sequencing. You said this is GSD 3. A GSD 3 study may be negative. So what do you do here is that you should have gone ahead with a targeted sequencing rather than a single sequencing. So this is important as to which test is to be done in that regard. The other thing is locus heterogeneity, in which many genes can cause the same disease. This is what we have discussed. A classic example of locus heterogeneity is hypophosphatemic rickets, as we discussed there. Now this pattern, Dilip? Yes, so only from mother you are seeing both male, female affected, but the males are not transferring. So this is classical mitochondrial inheritance, and because sperms don't have any mitochondria, they don't pass it on. And if the mother's all mitochondria are the same, then everybody will be affected. But if it is heteroplasmy, that is some mitochondria are different, some may be affected and some may not be affected. And the classical problems which happen with mitochondrial disorders are energy dependent. So it will affect the muscle, the nerve, the cardiomyopathies. You can sometimes have a hepatic problem, insulin production, PTH production, all those things may be affected in mitochondrial. Only from mother, heteroplasmy and pleiotrophy may happen. What about this? This child had 5 years, this had 3 years, this had 26 years, the first generation, and the grandfather was 48 years. So this is with every generation you're having earlier. This is known as anticipation. And often you will not get a history because they might not have manifested till now. So this will be relevant that if you identify in the grandchild, you can predict that this grandfather may also have the disease. So this happens basically with triplet repeats or telomeres problems. And we all know that there is a digenic inheritance in which 2 genes are essential for there. And you can have, so one gene can cause a problem, but if you have a heterozygous of both genes, it will affect that. So you need 2 genes to cause the disease. And you also have a triallelic or a oligogenic inheritance. And we talked about oligogenic inheritance yesterday on which patient? Bardet-Biedl syndrome, in which many genes are required to cause the same disease. And that becomes important from that perspective. So this is a rare form, but very important for Bardet-Biedl and hypogonadotropic hypogonadism in that perspective. What about polygenic? Multiple genes play a role, but they have small roles in that setting. And if you have a complex traits, genes and environment both play a role. This is what is known as a complex trait in that setting. So this is very quick. I think we'll go through quickly. So autosomal dominant, father to child, mother to child, both will happen. Parents will be affected. Disease risk is 50%. Carrier risk is none. Autosomal recessive, father to child, no. Mother to child, no. Parents affected, usually not. Disease risk 25%. Carrier risk 50%. X-linked recessive, father to child, no. Mother to child, yes. Parents affected, usually not, unless it's a X-linked dominant. Disease risk is 50% for male, carrier risk is 50% for female. X dominant, of course, as I said, everything similar, but mother will be affected in that setting. Y-linked, basically mother to child will not be there, father to child, but this is extremely rare. Mitochondrial, only from mother to child. So not from father to child, only mother, everybody will be affected. Imprinting, depending upon which parent is giving you the gene, is what is going to decide. So again, it will be variable. And finally, complex trait, basically this is both environment and the genetic factor. The risk is less than 2.5%. So if you see this table, this will help you decide which type of disease that you're dealing with.